I moved into Wyatt's apartment because I had nowhere else to go. That wasn't entirely true. I had options. I could have rented a tiny studio on the other side of the city, drained the savings I'd spent 3 years building, and eaten instant noodles until Christmas. I could have moved back in with my parents, which would have meant giving up every ounce of independence I'd fought for since college. Or I could have accepted the offer my older brother had made with complete confidence. Wyatt has a spare room. He's looking for someone to split the rent anyway. That sentence changed everything. "You mean Wyatt? You're Wyatt?" I asked. Hayden laughed through the phone. "I only have one best friend." I rubbed the back of my neck while staring at the cardboard boxes filling my apartment. "I don't know why not." Because Wyatt had always made me nervous. Not in a bad way, just in a way I couldn't explain. Growing up, Hayden and Wyatt have been inseparable. They met when they were 12, survived high school together, shared an apartment during college, and somehow their friendship had only gotten stronger. Wyatt had practically been a second brother in our house. He came to birthdays, Christmas dinners, summer barbecues. He knew where Mom kept the good cookies and which chair Dad always claimed during football games. He'd watched me stumble through awkward teenage years while he and Hayden teased each other over video games or argued about whose turn it was to buy pizza. Back then, I was just Hayden's annoying little brother. Now we were both adults, both 24, and the idea of living with him suddenly felt different. "You'll barely see each other," Hayden continued. "He works long hours. You're working from home half the week. It's perfect." "Did he actually agree?" I asked him yesterday, and he said yes before I even finished the sentence. That surprised me. "Really? Really?" I looked around my apartment one more time. The landlord had sold the building. Everyone had 30 days to leave. Mine were almost up. When can I move in? Hayden laughed again. "I knew you'd come around." 3 days later, I stood outside Wyatt's apartment building with 2 suitcases, a backpack, and enough anxiety to power the entire city. The building itself wasn't fancy. Old brick, 4 floors, small balconies overflowing with plants, the kind of place that looked comfortably lived in instead of expensive. Apartment 3B. I took one deep breath before knocking. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Wyatt looked exactly the way I remembered him. Tall, broad shoulders, dark blonde hair that somehow always looked slightly messy no matter how often he tried fixing it. His gray t-shirt had a small paint stain near the sleeve, and he was holding a coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Cook." For 1 second, we simply stared at each other. Then his face broke into a smile. "There he is." I smiled back. "Hey!" He stepped aside immediately. "Come in." The apartment smelled like fresh coffee and laundry detergent. It wasn't spotless. A hoodie rested over one chair. 2 books sat open on the coffee table. There were running shoes near the front door. It looked like someone actually lived there. "I cleaned the guest room," Wyatt said. "You didn't have to." "I know." He picked up one of my suitcases before I could stop him. "But I wanted your first impression to be better than guy who leaves socks everywhere." I laughed. "So, you do leave socks everywhere?"
You'll find out. The room was bigger than I expected. Queen-sized bed, desk by the window, bookshelf, closet already empty. Someone had even placed fresh towels neatly folded on top of the dresser. I looked around quietly. This is really nice. Wyatt leaned against the doorway. Good. You sure you're okay with this? He frowned. Why wouldn't I be? I don't know. He shrugged. Hayden asked. That can't be the only reason. Wyatt thought about it for a moment. No. Then he smiled again. I've known you forever, Wes.
Hearing my name in his voice felt strangely familiar. You won't steal my television. I wasn't planning to. You pay rent. I do. And honestly, he looked around the room. It's nice not living alone anymore. That answer settled something inside me. Maybe this wouldn't be awkward after all. The first hour disappeared while we carried boxes upstairs. Wyatt insisted on helping despite my repeated protests. You carried enough. So did you. I'm bigger. That's a terrible argument. It's working, he laughed. By evening, almost everything was unpacked. Not organized, just present. Cardboard boxes lined one wall. My laptop sat on the desk. My clothes filled half the closet. Home, or at least the beginning of one. Wyatt ordered pizza because neither of us felt like cooking. We ate in the living room while some random basketball game played quietly in the background. So he asked between bites, "How's work?" "Boring." "That's good." "It is. Boring jobs usually pay consistently." I nodded. "Fair point. And you?" "Same engineering firm. You still like it most days?" He stretched comfortably across the couch. "Some days I spend 8 hours fixing problems someone else created." "Sounds exhausting." "It is, but I get free coffee." I laughed. "So that's enough." "Depends how good the coffee is." Conversation came surprisingly easily. We talked about Hayden, our parents, movies. We'd both seen restaurants nearby. Nothing important, nothing forced. By 10 o'clock, I was exhausted. "I think I'm going to crash." Wyatt nodded. "Bathroom's yours whenever you need it." "Thanks." "And Wes?" I turned around. "I'm glad you moved in." There wasn't anything dramatic about the way he said it, just honest. "Me too." I meant it. The apartment became comfortable faster than I expected. Within a week, we had routines. Wyatt woke up before 7 every morning, always. Coffee, quick breakfast, running shoes, then work. I usually started later, working from my laptop at the dining table while music played softly through headphones. Some evenings we'd cook separately. Other nights we'd split groceries and make dinner together. Neither of us planned it. It just happened. "You chop vegetables terribly," Wyatt informed me one Tuesday. "I chop creatively. You nearly invented triangular carrots. They taste the same." "They absolutely do." He laughed so hard he nearly dropped the frying pan. Living together should have felt temporary. Instead, it started feeling natural. Too natural. One Friday evening, Hayden stopped by unexpectedly. He walked into the apartment without knocking, still using the spare key Wyatt had apparently forgotten to take back. "There are my favorite people." Wyatt looked up from the kitchen. "You still have that key? You still haven't asked for it." Hayden grinned before turning toward me. So how's married life? I nearly choked on my drink. Wyatt threw a kitchen towel directly at Hayden's face. Get out! Hayden laughed even harder. I'm kidding. No, you're being annoying. Same thing. Watching them together felt familiar. Exactly like when we were younger. Only now I wasn't watching from another room. I was sitting beside them. Part of the conversation, part of whatever this had become. Later that night, after Hayden finally left, Wyatt locked the door and shook his head. He hasn't matured at all, not even a little. Wyatt smiled. Thanks for putting up with him. I've been doing that my whole life. True. For some reason, neither of us moved. We just stood there in the quiet apartment. Then Wyatt cleared his throat. Breakfast tomorrow? You cook? I'll even let you ruin the vegetables. I smiled. It's a deal. At the time, it felt like the beginning of a really good friendship. I had absolutely no idea it was the beginning of something that would quietly change my entire life. The next month settled into something neither of us questioned. Living with Wyatt wasn't exciting in the dramatic sense. It was comfortable. Comfortable enough that I stopped thinking of the apartment as his and started calling it home. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee drifting under my bedroom door. Some mornings he'd already be gone, leaving a note on the counter. Don't forget the rent is due Friday, or bought more milk. Sometimes there would be a badly drawn smiley face that looked more threatening than friendly. I started leaving notes too. Your laundry is in the dryer. Pizza leftovers are mine. Don't kill my houseplant while I'm working. He always answered, no promises. It became our own strange language. One Saturday morning, I wandered into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and an old college hoodie. Wyatt was making pancakes. Actual pancakes. You cook breakfast now? I asked. I always cook breakfast. No, you've just never been awake to see it. He wasn't wrong. Weekends were different. Neither of us rushed anywhere. The apartment felt slower, quieter. He slid a plate across the counter. You look terrible. Good morning to you too. You'll feel better after eating. I sat down. You sound like my mother. I've learned from the best. That made me laugh. Mom adored Wyatt. She always had. Sometimes I wondered if she'd secretly wanted another son. Hayden called yesterday, Wyatt said while flipping another pancake. Oh, he wants everyone over next weekend. For what? He didn't say. So, probably something ridiculous. Definitely. We ate while sunlight filled the kitchen. No television, no phones, just easy conversation. It struck me again how simple everything felt around him. There was never pressure to entertain each other. Silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Around noon, Wyatt disappeared into his bedroom. When he came back 15 minutes later, he was wearing running clothes. You heading out? 10 miles. I stared at him. You're voluntarily running 10 miles? I like running. I like sitting. He laughed. I've noticed. You know what's great? What? My hobby involves couches. He grabbed his keys. I'll be back in an hour. Try not to die. I'll do my best. The apartment suddenly felt strangely empty after he left. I hadn't expected that. I opened my laptop, answered emails, made progress on work I'd ignored all week. But every so often, I'd glance toward the front door. Not consciously, just automatically. Almost exactly an hour later, I heard keys. Wyatt walked inside looking exhausted. His hair was damp with sweat. A small towel hung around his neck. "Still alive," he announced. "Barely." He pointed toward the refrigerator. "Orange juice. Doctor's orders. Roommates." He smiled before opening the fridge. "You're learning." Later that afternoon, we decided to buy groceries together. It seemed easier than making separate trips. The supermarket was crowded. Families, students, couples arguing over cereal brands. Wyatt pushed the shopping cart while I wandered ahead, grabbing things from shelves. "You don't need 3 different kinds of pasta," he called. "I absolutely do. You live with one other person. I like options." He shook his head dramatically. "This is why our grocery bill is ridiculous. Our grocery bill is ridiculous because you buy expensive coffee. It's quality coffee. It's beans. They're important beans." I laughed loud enough that an elderly woman smiled as she walked past us. Shopping with Wyatt shouldn't have been fun. Somehow it always was. On the way home, rain started unexpectedly. Heavy summer rain, the kind that appears without warning. We sprinted from the parking lot carrying grocery bags. By the time we reached the apartment building, we were soaked. Wyatt unlocked the front door while laughing. "We look ridiculous." "You look ridiculous." "You look worse. My hair always loses fights with humidity." He glanced at me. I noticed. I raised an eyebrow. "You've noticed my hair?" He looked briefly caught off guard. "I mean," he rubbed the back of his neck, "it kind of curls." I blinked. "You've never mentioned that." "I didn't think it mattered." "It doesn't." There was a tiny pause. Then we both laughed. Inside the apartment, we left wet shoes near the entrance. Wyatt disappeared into the hallway. "I'm changing before I catch pneumonia." "That's not how pneumonia works." "You don't know." "I actually do. You've become very judgmental. I'm educated." His bedroom door closed. I stood in the kitchen putting groceries away. A few minutes later, Wyatt returned wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie. His hair was still damp. "You hungry?" "We literally just bought food." "So, that's a yes." He started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator without waiting for an answer. Watching him cook had become oddly fascinating. Everything looked effortless, confident. He moved around the kitchen like he'd memorized every drawer months ago. "You ever think about opening a restaurant?" I asked. He looked horrified. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "I enjoy cooking." "So restaurants ruin enjoyable things?" I nodded thoughtfully. "Fair?" He handed me a knife. "Cut onions. I thought I wasn't trusted. I've accepted your limitations. I'm honored." We worked side by side until dinner was ready. Again, nothing remarkable happened. No dramatic conversations, no emotional confessions, just 2 people sharing the same space. After eating, we watched a movie. Halfway through, Wyatt fell asleep sitting on the opposite end of the couch, his head tilted slightly, arms crossed. The television reflected soft light across his face. I looked over, smiled to myself, and immediately looked back at the screen because staring at your roommate while he slept was strange. Obviously, I told myself I was only making sure he wasn't uncomfortable, nothing more. When the credits rolled almost 40 minutes later, he opened one eye. "Did I miss the ending?" "You missed most of the movie." He stretched. "I worked all week." "I know. You should have woken me. You looked peaceful." He stood slowly. I'll watch it again. You'll fall asleep again. Probably. He started toward the hallway before stopping.
Wes,
Yeah, I'm glad this apartment doesn't feel empty anymore. He said it so casually, like he wasn't aware of the effect those words had. I smiled. Me too. After he disappeared into his room, I stayed on the couch much longer than necessary. The apartment was quiet, comfortable, safe. It occurred to me then that Wyatt wasn't just Hayden's best friend anymore. He'd quietly become my favorite part of coming home. That realization should have worried me. Instead, I found myself looking forward to breakfast tomorrow. By the time October arrived, we developed habits neither of us talked about. Wyatt always made enough coffee for two. I always checked whether he'd remember to take lunch before he left for work. If he forgot, I'd text him. Lunch is still in the fridge. 5 minutes later, my phone would buzz. You just saved me $20. It became automatic. So automatic that neither of us questioned why we were taking care of each other. One Tuesday evening, I finished work earlier than usual. The apartment was unusually quiet. Wyatt wouldn't be home for another hour. I decided to clean, not because the place was messy, because I was avoiding answering emails. I vacuumed, wiped down the kitchen, folded the blanket we'd left on the couch after movie night. Then I noticed Wyatt's bedroom door was open. Normally it wasn't. I stopped in the hallway. His room looked exactly how I expected. Neat, simple, bed made, books stacked beside the nightstand, running metals hanging from one wall. A framed photo sat on his dresser. I walked a little closer. It was old. Hayden and Wyatt, maybe 18 years old. Both of them couldn't have been older than 13. Covered in mud, missing front teeth, laughing so hard neither of them was looking at the camera. I smiled. Another frame stood beside it. This one surprised me. It wasn't just Hayden, it was my whole family. Mom, Dad, Hayden, me. Wyatt stood beside us with one arm around my father's shoulders. Christmas, maybe 3 years ago. I'd completely forgotten that picture existed, yet somehow Wyatt hadn't. You snooping? His voice nearly made me jump out of my skin. I spun around. He stood in the doorway, holding his backpack. I laughed awkwardly. The door was open. I wasn't. You were looking. I rubbed the back of my neck. Sorry. Instead of looking annoyed, Wyatt stepped into the room. He glanced toward the photograph. Oh, I forgot you had that. So did I. He picked up the frame. Your mom gave it to me. When? Couple years ago. Why? He shrugged. Said I never printed photos. She's right. I know. He smiled softly at the picture before putting it back exactly where it had been. You've always been family. The sentence was simple, matter of fact, like he was stating the weather, but hearing it made something tighten unexpectedly inside my chest. Before I could answer, Wyatt looked toward the kitchen. Something smells clean. I vacuumed. You vacuumed? I got bored. He stared at me dramatically. I leave you alone for one afternoon and you become productive. I know it's terrifying. That evening, Hayden invited us to a sports bar to watch a football game. Normally, I would have declined. Crowds weren't really my thing. Wyatt nudged my shoulder lightly. Come on, you actually want to watch the game? No. Then why are you going? Hayden will complain if we don't. Fair. 20 minutes later, we were walking downtown together. The air had turned cooler. People wore light jackets. Leaves covered the sidewalks. Wyatt shoved his hands into his pockets. You cold? A little? Without saying another word, he pulled the knit beanie off his own head and held it out. Wear this. I blinked. What about you? I'll survive. You'll freeze. I run 10 miles for fun. That's true. I hesitated, then accepted it. The hat still felt warm. You didn't have to do that. I know, he smiled, but you'll complain less. I wasn't complaining. You were thinking about it. I laughed. You know me too well. Starting to something about that answer stayed with me all evening. The sports bar was loud, exactly as expected. Televisions covered every wall. People shouted every time something happened during the game. Hayden spotted us immediately. There they are. He waved us toward a table where several of his coworkers already sat. Introductions happened quickly. Names disappeared from my memory almost immediately. Wyatt seemed to know everyone, not because he dominated conversations, because people naturally gravitated toward him. He listened more than he talked, asked questions, remembered details. One of Hayden's coworkers pointed toward me. So, you're Wes? I nodded. I've heard about you. Oh, he grinned. Wyatt talks about his roommate all the time. I looked toward Wyatt. He looked equally surprised. I do. The coworker laughed. Every Monday, Wes found another coffee place. Wes convinced me to watch this movie. Wes somehow burned pasta. I did not burn pasta. Wyatt looked genuinely offended. It was slightly overcooked. Hayden burst out laughing. It was charcoal. It was one time. The entire table laughed, including me, but quietly. Something else settled into my thoughts. Wyatt talked about me enough that other people recognized my name. I wasn't expecting that. For some reason, it mattered more than it probably should have. The game ended around 11 o'clock. Wyatt and I walked home while the city slowly emptied around us. You really talk about me? He glanced sideways. I guess, why? He looked confused by the question. Because people ask what I've been up to, so you mention me. You're part of what I've been up to. The answer came so naturally. No hesitation, no embarrassment, like there was nothing unusual about it. Oh, he looked over. Is that weird? No. I smiled despite myself. I just didn't realize. Wyatt bumped my shoulder lightly. I hope you're saying nice things about me too. I tell everyone you're impossible. Excellent. And that you make terrible jokes. I make outstanding jokes. I've seen evidence. We reached the apartment building, still arguing over that. Inside, Wyatt dropped his keys into the bowl near the front door. I had a good night. Me too. He disappeared into the kitchen before returning with 2 bottles of water. He handed me one. Hydrate. You really are becoming my mother. I'll take that as a compliment. I twisted the cap open. You know what? I'm glad Hayden convinced me to move in. Wyatt leaned against the kitchen counter. So am I. Neither of us said anything after that. We didn't need to because somewhere between grocery shopping, shared breakfasts, bad movies, and handwritten notes on the refrigerator, this apartment had quietly become more than a place we lived. It had become the place where both of us felt most like ourselves. Neither of us realized that everyone around us had started noticing long before we did. It started with my mother. Looking back, I probably should have expected that. She noticed everything, always had. The four of us were having Sunday lunch at my parents' house, something Hayden insisted we continue doing at least once a month, no matter how busy everyone became. Wyatt arrived with dessert. Mom hugged him before she hugged Hayden. "You're my favorite," Hayden muttered. "I heard that," Mom replied without turning around. "I know." Wyatt leaned toward me. "This happens every time." "I know." Dad was outside trying to convince Hayden to help him fix a loose fence panel. Hayden was pretending not to hear him. Some things never changed. Lunch itself was loud, comfortable, exactly like every family gathering I'd ever known. Wyatt fit into it so naturally that if someone walked in halfway through, they'd assume he'd grown up with us. Mom kept adding food to everyone's plates despite repeated protests. Dad told the same story he'd told at least 6 times before. Hayden interrupted constantly. Wyatt laughed at all the right moments. I caught myself watching him more than once. Not staring, just watching. He looked relaxed, happy, at home. So, Mom said suddenly, "How's apartment life?" "It's been great," I answered. She looked toward Wyatt. "No complaints, only that Wes keeps buying too many snacks." I frowned. "There are emergency snacks. You've declared 4 different emergencies this week." I was hungry. Hayden nodded seriously. "Valid emergency." Mom rolled her eyes. "I raised children. Questionable decision," Hayden replied. Everyone laughed. A little later, while Wyatt and Dad carried dishes into the kitchen, Mom leaned closer to me. "So," I recognized that tone immediately. "Oh no." "What?" "You're using the so voice." "I don't have a voice." "You absolutely do." She smiled innocently. "I like Wyatt." "I know. I always have." "I know. I think it's good you're living together." I blinked. "Mom, what?" "You've been smiling at us all afternoon." "Have I?" "Yes." She looked completely unapologetic. "You boys seem happy." "We are." "I'm glad." That should have been the end of it. Instead, as she stood to collect empty glasses, she added quietly, "He smiles differently around you." Then she walked away before I could ask what that meant. The words stayed with me anyway. That evening, Wyatt and I drove home in comfortable silence. He glanced over while waiting at a red light. "You've been quiet. My mom said something weird." He laughed. "That narrows it down." "How?" "Fair." I looked out the window. "She said you smiled differently around me." Wyatt's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Did she?" "Yeah, what'd you say?" I didn't know what to say. He nodded once. "My mom notices stuff too." "Like what?" He smiled to himself. "Last week she asked if you were eating enough." I looked over. "Seriously? Seriously? She's never met me. I've shown her pictures." That caught me completely off guard. "You've shown your mom pictures of me." He looked equally surprised. "Yeah, why?" Another red light. He looked ahead instead of at me. "I don't know." Then after a second, "You live with me." Like that explained everything. Maybe to him it did. By the time we reached the apartment, I still wasn't sure what to make of that conversation. Monday morning arrived with rain. the kind that covered the windows in soft gray streaks. Wyatt left early as usual. I stayed home working. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Wyatt, forgot my umbrella. I smiled. Me? That's because you're incapable of planning ahead. 3 dots appeared immediately. Wyatt. True. Another message followed. Wyatt, don't forget your meeting at 2. I stared at the screen. I'd forgotten completely. Me. Thanks, Wyatt. That's what roommates are for. I smiled longer than I should have. That evening he came home soaked. You were right. I know. I needed the umbrella. I also know. He dropped his backpack near the couch. You enjoying this a little? I created a monster. You created someone who remembers things. He pointed toward me. You remembered because I reminded you details. He laughed. God, I liked making him laugh far more than I probably should have. A week later, Hayden invited us to his apartment for game night. Board games, pizza, a few friends, nothing unusual. Wyatt drove because Hayden lived across town. Halfway there, he suddenly frowned. What? I think I missed the turn. You definitely missed the turn. I was distracted by what? He opened his mouth, paused, then smiled awkwardly. You were talking. I laughed. So that's my fault. I'm blaming you completely. I accept no responsibility. He shook his head. You should. By the time we reached Hayden's building, we were still arguing about it. Game night itself was chaotic, exactly the way Hayden liked it. At one point, we split into teams for some trivia game. Without thinking, Hayden announced, Wyatt and Wes together. One of his friends looked between us. Of course. Hayden frowned. What does that mean? The guy shrugged. They've got married couple teamwork. The room laughed. I felt heat immediately rise into my face. Wyatt rubbed the back of his neck. We're just roommates. Sure. Another laugh. Hayden looked confused. I don't get it. His coworker grinned. You really don't? No. Wyatt cleared his throat. Who's asking the first question? The conversation moved on thankfully, but the comment stayed with me. On the drive home, neither of us mentioned it for several minutes. Finally, Wyatt sighed. People are weird. They are. Another silence then. I don't mind being on your team. The words escaped before I thought about them. Wyatt glanced over. I don't either. Simple. Honest. Nothing more. Yet somehow, the car suddenly felt much smaller. When we got back to the apartment, Wyatt unlocked the door while I carried leftover pizza inside. He stopped in the hallway. Wes, yeah, I'm glad everyone assumes we get along. I smiled. We do get along. We really do. He headed toward the kitchen. I watched him for just a second longer than I meant to because somewhere along the way, the line between looking forward to seeing my roommate and looking forward to seeing Wyatt had quietly disappeared. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. I told myself it was just a crush, temporary, harmless, the kind that disappears once real life gets busy. That explanation lasted almost 3 weeks. Then Wyatt got sick. It started on a Thursday. He texted me around noon. Wyatt, think I'm heading home early. That alone was unusual. Wyatt never left work early, ever. Me. Everything okay? A minute later, Wyatt, just feel awful. When I heard the apartment door open an hour later, I was already standing in the hallway. Wyatt looked exhausted. His hair was damp from the rain outside. His face had lost all color. You look terrible. He gave me a tired smile. Always nice to come home to compliments. I'm serious. So am I. He kicked off his shoes more slowly than usual. I think I've got a fever. Without thinking, I reached out and pressed the back of my hand lightly against his forehead. Warm, much warmer than normal. Wyatt looked at me in mild surprise. So you're definitely sick. I figured you should go to bed. I was planning on it. He disappeared into his room without another word. An hour later, I knocked softly on his door. Yeah, I pushed it open. He was lying on top of the blankets wearing an old gray sweatshirt. His eyes looked half closed. I brought you water. You didn't have to. I know. I set the glass on his nightstand. You eaten today? He frowned. He actually thought about it. I don't remember. I sighed. That's a no. Wes, I'm making soup. You don't have to. I already decided. He smiled weakly. Bossy, you'll survive. I hope so. I spent the next 40 minutes making the only soup I knew how to cook. It wasn't particularly impressive, but it smelled decent. When I carried the bowl into Wyatt's room, he had fallen asleep. For a moment, I simply stood there. The apartment was completely quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Wyatt slept curled slightly onto one side, breathing slowly. Without the constant smile or sarcastic comments, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. I quietly placed the soup on his desk and started to leave. Wes. His voice was rough. I turned around. I wasn't asleep. You definitely were. Maybe. I walked back toward him. I made soup. He looked at the bowl, then at me. You actually cooked. I know. I'm a little scared. It'll be fine. He sat up carefully. You really didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. The words came out before I could stop them. Wyatt looked at me for a second longer than usual, then smiled. Thank you. That smile did something dangerous to my heart. The next morning, he still looked miserable. I can work from home, he insisted. No, I have meetings. You have a fever. I'll survive. You sound terrible. I always sound handsome. I laughed despite myself. You sound delusional. That's the fever. I crossed my arms. Back to bed. He looked at me. Actually looked. Then slowly raised both hands. I surrender. By Saturday, he finally seemed a little better. Not healthy, just less pale. He wandered into the living room wearing sweatpants and carrying the blanket around his shoulders. You've become dramatic. I'm cold. It's 70 degrees inside. I disagree. I handed him another mug of tea. You've been taking care of me for 2 days. You would have done the same. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down into his mug. Yeah. Then quietly, I would have. That evening, we watched a documentary neither of us found particularly interesting. Halfway through, Wyatt yawned. I'm sorry for what? I've ruined your weekend. You caught the flu. Still, I shrugged. I don't mind. He looked over. I know. There was something about the way he said it. Soft, certain, like he'd never doubted it. By Monday, he was healthy enough to return to work. The apartment immediately felt different again. Quieter, almost too quiet. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Wyatt survived the morning. I smiled. Me. Congratulations. Thanks for last week. I stared at the message, then typed back. Anytime. A few seconds passed, then another text appeared. I mean it. I read it twice, 3 times before finally locking my phone. That night, Wyatt came home carrying a small paper bag. I brought dessert. You didn't have to. I know. He held the bag out toward me. But you took care of me. You don't owe me anything. I know. He smiled. I still wanted to. We ate cheesecake sitting on opposite ends of the couch. At one point, Wyatt laughed at something on television. Without realizing it, I found myself smiling too. Not because the show was funny, because he was. That scared me. Not a little, a lot. Because this wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't admiration or convenience or simply enjoying having a good roommate. I had fallen for Wyatt completely. And he wasn't just my roommate. He was my brother's best friend. The one person I absolutely couldn't allow myself to want. For the next few days, I avoided Wyatt. Not obviously. I wasn't suddenly locking myself in my room or inventing excuses to leave the apartment. I just became busy. If he was making coffee, I'd wait 5 extra minutes before going into the kitchen. If we usually watched a movie after dinner, I'd suddenly remember work I needed to finish. If he asked whether I wanted to grab groceries together, I'd tell him I already went. It was pathetic and completely ineffective, because avoiding someone you lived with turned out to be almost impossible. On Wednesday evening, I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to concentrate on my laptop, when Wyatt came home. He stopped after taking one look at me. "You're still working." I didn't look up. "Yeah, Wes." "It's almost 8. "I know." He stood there another moment. "You skipped dinner." "I'm not that hungry." Silence. Then I heard him walk into the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned carrying a plate. He placed it beside my laptop. "Eat. I told you." "I know what you told me." I looked up. He crossed his arms. "You've been acting weird all week." My stomach tightened. "I've just been busy." "No." His answer came immediately. "You've been avoiding me." "I haven't." "You have?" I forced a laugh. "Wyatt, what happened?" The concern in his voice made everything worse, because he genuinely had no idea. "It wasn't anything you did." "Then what is it?" I couldn't answer. How was I supposed to explain that I'd fallen for him because he remembered my meetings, made coffee every morning, smiled whenever I walked into a room, and thanked me like caring about him actually mattered? Instead, I closed my laptop. "I'm just stressed." He watched me carefully. "You sure?" "Yeah." He didn't look convinced, but he nodded anyway. "If you ever want to talk." "I know. You don't have to handle everything alone." I smiled weakly. "Thanks." He squeezed my shoulder as he walked past. Just for a second. Completely casual, completely innocent. It took everything I had not to close my eyes. That night I barely slept. The next morning, Hayden called. "You alive?" "Barely. Rough week." "You could say that." He was quiet for a second. "You know, Wyatt asked if something happened." My heart immediately started racing. "He what?" "He thinks you're upset. I told him work's been stressful. He doesn't believe you." I closed my eyes. "Great. You two okay?" "Yeah." "You sure?" "Of course." Hayden laughed. You know what's funny? What? I've never seen Wyatt worry about a roommate before. I frowned. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Hayden sounded distracted, probably making coffee. He asked me twice if you'd seemed different lately. He did. Yeah. What'd you tell him? The truth, and that you've always been terrible at hiding when something's bothering you. Wonderful. Thanks. You'll figure it out. If only you knew. Nothing. After hanging up, I sat staring at my phone. Wyatt had called Hayden because he was worried about me. Most people wouldn't. Most roommates definitely wouldn't, which only made everything harder. Friday evening arrived with the first really cold weather of the year. I got home just after 6. The apartment was dark. Wyatt wasn't back yet. I changed into comfortable clothes and started making dinner. About 20 minutes later, the front door opened. I'm home. And here, Wyatt walked into the kitchen carrying 2 paper bags. I stopped by the bakery. You bought bread and cinnamon rolls. I looked at him. Cinnamon rolls? They smelled good. They always smell good. Exactly. He placed the bags on the counter before looking at me more closely. You look tired. So do you. I always look tired. You don't. He smiled. You're getting your eyesight checked. We cooked together almost automatically, passing ingredients back and forth, opening cabinets without getting in each other's way. At one point, we both reached for the same wooden spoon. Our hands brushed, only for a second. Wyatt pulled his hand back immediately. Sorry. No, you're fine. Why did that tiny moment affect me so much? It shouldn't have. It really shouldn't have. After dinner, Wyatt disappeared into his room for a while. When he came back, he was holding a thick photo album. I found something. What? He dropped onto the couch beside me. My mom gave this back. He opened it. Old photographs, mostly high school, college, family trips. You've had this forever. Pretty much. He turned another page. There. I leaned closer. It was from Hayden's 17th birthday. Everyone stood in the backyard. Dad grilling burgers, Mom laughing at something, Hayden trying to shove birthday cake into Wyatt's face, and me standing off to one side wearing an oversized hoodie. I looked 12. You were 17. I had a late growth spur. Wyatt laughed. I remember. You remember that? I remember a lot. He kept turning pages. Another Christmas, another barbecue, camping, graduation. It suddenly hit me how many years Wyatt had been part of my life. Always there, always somewhere in the background until suddenly he wasn't in the background anymore. Wyatt stopped on one picture. I forgot about this. It showed the two of us sitting on the porch steps at my parents' house. I couldn't have been older than 15. Wyatt was laughing at something I'd apparently said. Neither of us looked at the camera. I remember that day, he said quietly. You do? You spent an hour trying to convince me pineapple belonged on pizza. I laughed. I was right. You absolutely weren't. You still remember that argument? I remember you being unbelievably stubborn. So do you. True. He smiled down at the photograph. You've changed a lot. Hopefully for the better, for the taller. I'll take it. He looked at me. No. His expression softened. I mean, you've become someone I really enjoy being around. The room suddenly felt very still. I always did. The words came out so quietly I almost wasn't sure I'd heard them. What? Wyatt looked away, almost embarrassed. I've always liked talking to you. He shrugged. Even when you were younger, I thought I was just Hayden's annoying little brother. You were, I laughed. Thanks, but he smiled. You were funny. There it was again, that smile, the one Mom had noticed, the one that somehow seemed different when he looked at me. I forced myself to look back at the photo album instead, because meeting his eyes for too long was becoming dangerous. Dangerous enough that I was starting to wonder whether I was the only one trying so hard not to notice what was changing between us. The following week refused to let me think straight. Every time I convinced myself I was imagining things, Wyatt would do something that made the walls I'd built around my feelings crack a little more. Monday morning, he left before I woke up. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the note waiting beside the coffee maker. Big presentation today. You'll do great, Wyatt. I stood in the kitchen staring at 6 handwritten words far longer than anyone reasonably should. He remembered. I hadn't even mentioned the presentation in almost a week. Somehow, he'd remembered. Anyway, my phone buzzed halfway through the meeting, not during it, 5 minutes after it ended. Wyatt survived. I smiled before I could stop myself. Me, barely. Wyatt knew you'd be fine. No dramatic congratulations, no long conversation, just enough to let me know he'd been thinking about me. That should have felt normal. Instead, it stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. When Wyatt came home that evening, I was cooking. He leaned against the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie. So the presentation? Oh, I looked over my shoulder. It went well. His face brightened immediately. I knew it. You sound very confident. I've seen you work. He shrugged. You prepare too much to fail. I laughed quietly. That's somehow both a compliment and an insult. I'm talented. You really think highly of yourself. Someone has to. I shook my head. You hungry? Starving. He disappeared long enough to change into comfortable clothes before joining me in the kitchen. For several minutes, we cooked without speaking. Comfortable silence, the kind we'd grown used to. Wyatt reached into the cabinet above me. As he leaned closer, I caught the familiar scent of his laundry detergent. Fresh, clean, comfortingly familiar. I stepped backward just a little too quickly. You okay? Yeah. You sure? I pointed toward the cabinet. Needed room. He frowned slightly but didn't question it. I hated myself for that. Not because I'd lied, because I'd almost forgotten how to breathe. 2 nights later, Wyatt was already asleep when I got home. I'd stayed late helping a sea orker finish a project. The apartment was dark except for the small lamp over the kitchen sink. As I quietly unpacked my bag, I noticed another note on the refrigerator. Dinner's in the oven, heat for 15 minutes. There was a smiley face underneath. His smiley faces somehow looked even worse than mine. I laughed softly. Then I opened the oven. Lasagna still wrapped carefully in foil, enough for both of us. He'd made dinner knowing I'd be home late without asking, without mentioning it. I ate alone in the quiet apartment. For some reason, it was one of the loneliest meals I'd had in months. Not because I was alone, because I wished he were awake. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather. Blue skies, cold air, sunlight that made everything look brighter than it actually was. Wyatt wandered into the living room carrying 2 travel mugs. "I've got an idea." "That sounds dangerous." "It usually is." He handed me one of the mugs. "Let's go somewhere." "Somewhere?" "Anywhere." I laughed. "That's a terrible plan." "I know a hiking trail about 40 minutes away." "I don't hike." "You walk." "Reluctantly. You'll survive." "I feel manipulated." "You are." An hour later we were driving out of the city. Trees lined both sides of the road, their leaves turning shades of orange and gold. Wyatt had music playing quietly through the speakers. Neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. The trail wasn't difficult, mostly flat, surrounded by tall trees that filtered the afternoon sunlight into scattered patches across the ground. This was a good idea, I admitted. Wyatt looked unnecessarily pleased with himself. "I know. I hate agreeing with you. I know that too. You know everything, almost." We walked for nearly an hour before reaching a small wooden overlook above a river. There was nobody else there, just the sound of moving water and wind through the trees. Wyatt rested his elbows against the railing. "I come here sometimes, when work gets loud." I looked at him. "I didn't know that." "I don't tell many people." He smiled slightly. "But I figured you'd like it." There it was again, that quiet certainty, like he'd been paying attention to the little things I liked without ever making a point of saying so. "It's peaceful." "Yeah." He looked out over the river. "I think that's why I keep coming back." We stood there for several minutes, neither of us speaking. The silence felt different somehow. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. Wyatt broke it first. "You know something?" "What?" "I'm really glad you answered Hayden's phone call." I turned toward him. "What do you mean?" "If you'd rented some apartment across the city," he smiled to himself, "we probably would have kept seeing each other only a few times a year, I guess." I would have hated that. Those words landed somewhere deep inside me. Before I could respond, his phone started ringing. He pulled it from his pocket. "Hayden." He answered immediately. "Hey!" I looked away, giving him privacy. He listened for a few seconds, then laughed. "No, we're out hiking." Another pause. Wyatt glanced toward me. "Yeah." His smile grew a little. "Wes is with me." For some reason, hearing him say my name like that made my chest tighten. Not because of the words, because of the warmth in his voice. He ended the call a minute later. What did Hayden want? He forgot where he left his toolbox. "You knew?" "I did." "How?" Wyatt looked amused. "He leaves it at my apartment every other month." Our apartment. The correction slipped out automatically. Wyatt blinked, then smiled. Our apartment. Neither of us said anything after that, but for the rest of the walk back to the car, I couldn't stop thinking about those 2 words. Our apartment. Somewhere along the way, without either of us noticing exactly when it had happened, it had stopped feeling like Wyatt was letting me stay in his home. It had quietly become ours. That evening, after we got back from the hike, something had changed. Not dramatically, nothing had happened. No confession, no lingering glance that lasted too long, no moment that could be pointed to as the beginning of something new, and somehow everything felt different. Wyatt ordered takeout because neither of us wanted to cook. After walking all afternoon, we ate on the balcony despite the cold. The city lights stretched out below us, cars moving like slow streams of white and red. Wyatt pulled his hoodie tighter. "You freezing a little?" Without thinking, I stood. "I'll grab another blanket." When I came back outside, Wyatt smiled. "You always think ahead. I learned from you." He laughed quietly. "I'll take credit for that." For a while, we just sat there listening to the city, watching people we'd never meet live their own lives somewhere below us. Then Wyatt spoke. "You know what? I don't think I've thanked you enough." "For what?" "For moving in." I frowned. "I should be thanking you." "No," he shook his head. "I mean it." His expression had turned unusually serious. "I got used to living alone and I thought I liked it." He looked out across the skyline. "Turns out I just got used to being lonely." The words settled between us, heavy, honest. "I didn't realize." "I didn't either." He smiled sadly. "Not until you were here." I didn't know what to say because hearing him admit that filled me with warmth and heartbreak at exactly the same time. "You've made this place feel," he searched for the right word, "alive." I looked down into my untouched cup of tea. "I feel the same way." He glanced over. "Really?" "Yeah," I laughed quietly. "I used to hate going home after work." "You did?" My apartment never felt like home. I looked toward the living room through the open balcony door. "This one does." Wyatt followed my gaze. "Our apartment." He said it so naturally, like he'd already accepted it, like there wasn't another way to describe it anymore. Our apartment, our kitchen, our couch, our routines. The words made me smile. "You know what Hayden told me?" Wyatt asked. "What?" "He said he's never seen me happier." I blinked. "He actually said that last week." Wyatt rubbed the back of his neck. I laughed at him. "And I've been thinking about it ever since." He looked at me, really looked at me. I think he might be right. For one terrifying second, I thought he was about to say something that would change everything. Instead, he smiled. So, he leaned back in his chair. "Thanks. Just thanks. Simple, sincere, completely, Wyatt." I smiled back. "You're welcome." Later that night, we watched another movie. Wyatt fell asleep halfway through again. Some habits never changed. When the credits rolled, I nudged his shoulder gently. "Hey, movie's over." He blinked awake. "I missed it. Almost all of it." He groaned. "I keep doing that." "You do?" Instead of standing immediately, he stayed where he was for another moment. Still half asleep, still smiling. "You know what? This was a really good day." "It was." He nodded slowly. "We should do more days like this." "I'd like that." He stood, stretched, and headed toward the hallway. At his bedroom door, he stopped. "Night, Wes." "Night." He disappeared inside. His door clicked softly shut. I remained on the couch. The apartment was quiet again, peaceful, safe. Everything I'd wanted, everything I never expected to find. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, because now I finally understood what had been changing all these months. It wasn't just that I'd fallen in love with Wyatt. That part was obvious now. The harder truth was this. I'd fallen in love with ordinary moments. Morning coffee, shared grocery trips, notes on the refrigerator, movie nights where he slept through the ending, the sound of his keys in the front door after work, the smile he always gave me before saying, "I'm home." Maybe that was the most dangerous kind of love, the quiet kind, the kind that grows so slowly you don't notice it until it's become part of your everyday life. I didn't know whether Wyatt would ever feel the same. Maybe he never would. Maybe I'd carry this secret for months, maybe longer. But for now, it was enough to hear his footsteps every morning, enough to know someone waited for me at home, enough to share an apartment with the person who had quietly become my favorite part of every single day. Outside, the city continued moving beneath thousands of lights. Inside, our apartment settled into silence, and somewhere behind the wall that separated our bedrooms, Wyatt was home. For tonight, that was enough.